Hi everybody, welcome back to my YouTube page. My name is Eric, and today we're going to be discussing more objections to the Bible. Now, many skeptics will try and approach the Bible, and they'll use some objection that goes something like this. Well, you Christians, you don't believe in the other religious texts in the world. You don't believe in, the Greek gods of old. You don't believe in, the different religions of Africa or Asia. You don't believe in the Quran or this other holy books. So why should your religious text be taken seriously if you're just going to dismiss all of the others? Or in some cases they will say, well, these other texts you agree with us are false. So clearly humans just have this compulsion to make things up around the supernatural, especially with regards to the foundations of religion. So clearly we have to be very hyper-skeptical of the Gospels. And many Christians just don't know how to answer this. Well, here's the reality of the situation. This objection, at least the way that atheists tend to imply it, is one of the biggest areas where atheists are just flat out factually incorrect on many different levels. And if they ever said that in an academic context or said it for a paper, they would not be taken seriously. So, what's wrong with this objection? Saying that all religious texts and books are equally likely to be historically true is like saying that all countries in the world have the exact same amount of territories, that they are just as wealthy as each other, or saying that all sports are equally dangerous. It's just not true. It's not even close to being true. I'm not saying Christianity is entirely a unique case in every regard, but saying that with this idea that, Christianity is a religious holy text, this other text is a holy religious text, and we don't believe this, therefore we have to completely dismiss the Christian texts, is not sound reasoning. So whenever people like Ricky Gervais, a comedian from Australia, basically says memes like this, we need to dig into the details, because the devil is always in the details. So in this video, I'm going to dissect how these religions don't really compare to Christianity in terms of their historical credibility, at least a lot of them. Now, I can't exhaustively deal with every single individual religion because that would take ages, but there are enough broad strokes to really cut this objection that skeptics backload into their analysis of the Gospels, which is that, it's a religious text, and clearly we can't trust that, because there are so many other religious texts that are just wrong, so the Gospels are just as likely to be false as those. And that objection is going to be at the heart of this video, and the thing that I'm going to be dealing with. So let's analyze this claim bit by bit. First of all, is it true that there are 4,000 religions in the world? Now, some estimates do say that there's up to 10,000 religions and different other things, and some of them are things like in the past, like the Greek religions, and others are still present. It is debated. But is it true that there are thousands of different competing religions? Well, it depends on how narrowly you want to define a religion. You see, in Pew Research, they have a very broad category known as folk religions. Now, this includes areas in Africa where there are many different tribal faiths, and it's the same case in China. There are many different specific religions, but they all have a lot of the similar concepts and ideas. Other religions that fit into this category are Native American religions, things like that. So the thing about these religions, and I'm just using these three categories as a big example, is that whenever you try to count up the religions, you count up each and individual tribe's faith as one religion. And naturally, there are many, many tribes or many villages, many cultures within the continent of Africa, within, the continent of Asia, that naturally you can easily get to thousands. But here's the thing about these religions. A lot of the time, to start with, let's look at Africa. It's not as though all of these African religions are sitting there thinking that every other world view has to conform to their specific worldview, otherwise they're going to have some bad afterlife, or things like that. No. Many of these religions, for example, in Africa, surround spirit worship and ancestor worship. Now, interestingly enough, many of them do believe in a supreme God that is basically he's not really knowable, and they really only go to him in cases of very big emergencies. Now, the thing about these religions is that, broadly speaking, they are preserved by oral tradition. They don't have necessarily religious texts that, they go and verify, is this historically accurate, is this accurate? It's mostly with a bunch of rituals and many different things like that. It's not so much this one tribe has their religious text that they believe happened, and the other tribe has this religious text that this happened. Many of them don't have religious texts. They have oral traditions that have been passed down, and many other things. Sometimes these traditions range from, being very incredibly precise in a very controlled manner. In some cases, they're more open, and they have some changes. But basically, these are just rituals to appease their ancestors, to whenever somebody dies or something, to incorporate that person who dies into the status of an ancestor. And they believe in various spirits and things like that in terms of their culture. It's not really about, specifically memorizing and reading this holy book like we have the Bible. It's a very much oriented towards practices and rituals. These are really so there aren't really a lot of, and I'm not saying this is true of all of the native African religions, but many of them don't have holy texts. Some of them do, but they've been preserved, and it's not really sure how far they go back. We can't really trace all of them. They just kind of happened a lot. So there really isn't anything to really, I don't want to say there's nothing to prove, but there really isn't any way to verify these things at all. It's really kind of you either believe it or you don't. It's also true of a lot of Native American religions in some ways, although, there are a lot of, they're very different from the African religions, broadly speaking, because, again, some Native Americans believe in some creator god, but other tribes don't. But they pretty much, a lot of them believe in different animal guides and animal things like that. It's very complicated, and I'm not gonna, Native American religions are very complex and very diverse, but they do share something in common, which is that it's not as though Native Americans have this vested interest where, we have to prove historically that our faith goes back to, it happened at 1000 BC and now it's at 500 BC or things like that. That's not really how they think. And it's the same thing with many of the indigenous Chinese religions. Many of them don't have holy texts specifically. They just have traditions that are written down, and things like that, but it's not like a book like the Bible or something. It's mostly just ritual and practice and different things like that. It's not, and again, they don't really have much of a vested interest in saying, well, this specific person has this religion and, our way is the only way, and they really don't do that much. There are also the ancient Greek religions. There's many religions like that. They had a lot of things basically taking place in some amorphous, weird past. Essentially, they were just texts that they basically have, a sort of once upon a time story, essentially theme. They don't really date themselves at all. It's not like, they say Zeus came, 500 years ago, and did this, that, and the other thing. It kind of just basically they just have this sort of idea that yes, these stories happened and the gods are real, but it just happened a long time ago, essentially. And we don't really know how a lot of these things evolved. Historically, we just, they got here and it was a once upon a time story. That's pretty much it. Which is not really like the Gospels, which actually set themselves in a specific time period. Now, again, in some cases, such as secret religions, many cases they did claim like a story, but didn't believe that it was literally true, that it was more of like, parables or things like, teaching for teaching purposes and things like that. They didn't necessarily have to be like historically true in that sense. Others, like I mentioned before with the Greek religions, they sort of take place in the primordial past. Now again, in some cases, not all cases, but many cases, the individual Greek religions, specifically didn't have texts unique to them. Now they did have things like Homer's Iliad, which was broadly accepted as authoritative, but it's not as though they had specifically scriptures for each and every individual god or goddess or things like that. Now, they did have things that were broadly accepted by the majority of the Greek religions, but again, their texts aren't really datable. It doesn't really work as well. So, some cases in the secret religions, we don't really know much about them because they didn't write anything down. They were basically just very secretive and didn't want to just shout their, beliefs to outsiders. So acting as though we can treat, the Gospels with equal amounts of skepticism with that is just not true. Now, there are other cases in which we can date religions. For example, we have Buddhism, which, yes, we can date Buddhism to around the 5th century BC, and that's when, Buddha was supposed to have lived. The problem is that the texts written about him weren't committed to writing until several hundred years after he lived. And many people just consider, there are many different traditions about Buddha, but, they're not nearly as fortunate as the New Testament, which are pretty universally accepted. And although there is some debate about the New Testament, which we will get to later, it's pretty unanimously agreed today, at least. that, the Gospels, the Paul letters, they're pretty much all at least first century documents. Even like liberal scholars will tend to put like the Gospel of John, late, but like in the 90s AD, as well as, the book of Revelation and as well as his letters. But they wouldn't, that's far, far, far and away better than the Buddhist texts. Hinduism fares even worse, because it's commonly accepted that that Hinduism is around 5,000 years old, but the Vedas, which are basically their holy texts, and there are different sections of them, but I don't have time to go into it, but you can look at it in a basic facts guide about Hinduism. They weren't written down at least until 1500 years approximately, 1500 BC, which is, that's a 1500 year difference at least in the amount of time that it was recorded in. So it's, that's a 1500 year gap, and there is not anybody who believes that, certainly not that I'm aware of, that believes that the Christian documents were written 1500 years after the fact. So, the Christian documents, there's no comparison between 1500 years of time and maybe, a few decades worth of time. Saying that those things that the Christian documents are equally likely to be as corrupted as, Hindu texts or things like that is just wrong. Zoroastrianism, although again it fares a bit better than Hinduism, is in a similar boat to Buddhism in that, it's hundreds of years after the fact that the texts were written down about the founder's life. It really, again, there's no comparison between Christianity and these other religions. Now, there are many other religions we could talk about, but the point is that they come from a wide diversity of things. So you can't say that, and yes, it is possible that, in the event of religious traditions, yes, it's obvious that 1500 years the messages can change. That's not, of course that's easy. But saying that Christians are just as likely to have been making things up or be mistaken as, these other religions, that's just not a fair statement. Now, of course, there are other religions such as Judaism, Islam, and Mormonism and Baha'ism and things like that. But, Baha'ism is, that religion is sort of an offshoot of Islam specifically, and, things like that. But, and again, Islam is another case that I can't deal with exhaustively in this one video. Judaism, of course, it has the same texts that we do, at least the Old Testament texts. We just add different ones, so we do accept theirs, we just interpret them differently. In some cases, not all, but some. And, but, even in the case of, Islam, for example, Christianity does still have an advantage over it, aside from, again, the dating of those texts is also another topic that's controversial and deserves more examination than I can provide in this brief video. But it's still but it's something that I will get to eventually. But a big advantage that Christianity has over Islam, for example, is that the New Testament is multiple documents written by multiple authors. For example, we have 4 biographies about Jesus, as well as a history of the apostles, and many different letters and documents written about that. Written about Jesus, the vast overwhelming majority of which, if not all of them, include something about his resurrection from the dead. Many of them include miracle stories and different signs that he did. So it's a collection of documents as opposed to the Quran, which is just one book written by one person in his lifetime, which is, which is another advantage that it would have over a religion like Mormonism, which is, is the Book of Mormon written by one person. So the New Testament has a lot of advantages over this. And we can't just simply backload this assumption of, well, Christianity is a religious document, so clearly we have to be very careful and hyper-skeptical about it, because these other religious texts aren't true, so it's clearly very likely that this one can be false. That's not really that's a very incomplete way of looking at this picture. If an atheist says this objection, because they'll try and say, oh, well, other religions have holy texts that are equally likely to be as true. If they say that, that in and of itself is a positive claim. Whether or not they intend it to be one, it is an inherently positive claim. Now, atheists will often try and say, well, the burden of proof is on Christians. You have to prove that if you claim God exists, you have to prove it. I don't have to do anything. And okay, that is fair. If they don't make any claims, they just say, I don't have, I have a lack of belief in God or something like that. Okay, fine. Then yeah, you don't have to say anything in that way. But if you say, oh, there are other religious texts that are equally likely to be true, that's a positive claim that they make. And they have the burden of proof to then say, to have to construct a positive case similar to what you're doing for those other religions, saying, well, this other religion has the same thing that yours does, and do that. They have to do that if they want to make that positive claim. You, as a Christian, don't have to say, well, I have to actively disprove every other religion in the world in order for you to take the religious texts seriously that I believe in. So I hope you liked this video. I hope this was informative. All the sources will be in the description. So I hope you all like this video, and I'll see you all next week. Bye, everybody.